19-year-old Jaden Cole sat quietly in seat 1A, watching the tarmac heat shimmer through the window of the Gulfstream jet. He wasn't just a passenger, he was the majority shareholder of the airline. But when a woman named Bianca Miller stormed onto the plane, dropped her designer bags and demanded he move to coach because people like him didn't belong in first class, she made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was putting a disrespectful teenager in his place. Instead, she was about to ground the entire flight, lose her career, and face a humiliating truth that would go viral before the wheels even left the ground. This is the story of how arrogance met instant karma. The recycled air inside the cabin of Flight 402, bound from New York to London, was already chilled to a crisp 68 degrees. It was the specific ambient temperature requested by the VIPs, usually inhabiting the front section of the aircraft. Jaden Cole adjusted the cuffs of his hoodie. It was a simple, charcoal grey pullover that looked like something picked off a rack at a discount store. But in reality, it was a limited-run cashmere blend from a boutique in Tokyo. Jaden preferred it this way: low profile, invisible. At 19, he had already inherited the majority stake in Cole Stratton Logistics and its subsidiary, Sovereign Air, following the sudden passing of his grandfather, Toby Cole. He tapped the screen of his tablet, reviewing the merger documents for a new cargo hub in Dubai. He was tired. He just wanted to sleep for the 7-hour flight. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, Mr. Cole?" The flight attendant, a sharp woman named Sarah with impeccable posture and a tight bun, hovered discreetly by his elbow. She knew exactly who he was. The flight manifest had him flagged as Owner VIP, a status that usually sent the crew into a panic. But Jaden had insisted on zero fanfare, no announcements, no special treatment visible to the other passengers. "Just water, please, Sarah, and maybe keep the blinds down until we hit cruising altitude," Jaden said, his voice low and smooth. "Of course, sir." Sarah slipped away toward the galley. Jaden put his noise-cancelling headphones on, not playing music, just dulling the hum of the auxiliary power unit. He closed his eyes. The piece lasted exactly 3 minutes. A commotion at the front boarding door shattered the quiet atmosphere of the first-class cabin. It wasn't just the sound of luggage wheels rolling over the threshold. It was a voice, shrill, demanding, and piercingly loud. "I don't care what the scanner said. My ticket is full fare. I am not checking this bag. Do you know how much this leather costs?" Jaden didn't open his eyes immediately. He hoped the crew would handle it. "Ma'am, please, if you could just take your seat, we can find overhead space for you," a junior flight attendant's voice pleaded. "I know where my seat is. 1A. I always book 1A. It's the only seat with the legroom I require for my sciatica." Jaden's eyes snapped open. He was in 1A, and he had booked it 3 weeks ago. The owner of the voice rounded the corner into the first-class cabin. Bianca Miller was a vision of aggressive wealth. She wore a leopard print scarf that clashed with her bright red blazer, and her blonde hair was teased into a helmet of hairspray that seemed to defy gravity. She was dragging a Louis Vuitton carry-on that was clearly 2 inches too wide for the sizer. She stopped dead in the aisle, her eyes scanning the seats until they landed on Jaden. He looked back at her calmly, removing his headphones. Bianca's face contorted. It wasn't just confusion. It was instant, visceral disgust. She looked at his hoodie, his sneakers, and his youth. In her mind, the calculation was instant. He doesn't belong. She didn't wait for a flight attendant. She marched right up to him, her heels clicking aggressively on the thin carpet. "Excuse me," Bianca said, her tone dripping with false politeness that barely masked the venom underneath. "You're in my seat." Jaden checked his digital boarding pass on his watch. "I don't think so, ma'am. This is 1A. "I know it's 1A. Bianca snapped, dropping the facade. "I mean, you are in my seat. There has clearly been a booking error. They double-booked us. And since I am a Diamond Medallion member with Sovereign Air, and you are, well, clearly a standby upgrade or a staff relative, you're going to need to move." Jayden blinked. The audacity was almost impressive. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." Bianca let out a short, incredulous laugh. She turned to the rest of the cabin, looking for allies. A businessman in 2B buried his face in his newspaper, terrified of making eye contact. "Listen to me, kid," Bianca said, leaning in closer, her perfume overpowering the sterile air of the cabin. "I have an incredibly important meeting in London. I need to rest. I don't have time to argue with someone who probably used miles from a cereal box to get up here. Now, gather your trash," she gestured to his high-end tablet, "and go find your real seat in row 40. Sarah, the head flight attendant, hurried over, her face pale. She had heard the escalation from the galley. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah said, stepping between Bianca and Jayden. "Is there a problem?" "Yes, there is a huge problem." Bianca pointed a manicured finger at Jayden's face. "This boy is in my seat. I want him removed. Immediately." Sarah took a deep breath. She was a veteran of the skies, having flown for 15 years. She had seen drunks, nervous flyers, and celebrities, but nothing terrified her more than the current situation. She knew exactly who Jayden was. She also knew that Jayden had explicitly ordered the crew not to reveal his identity unless absolutely necessary. He wanted to see how the staff and the passengers behaved when they thought no one was watching. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah said, keeping her voice even and professional, "Mr. Cole has a valid boarding pass for seat 1A. I have checked the manifest. Your seat is 2A, right across the aisle. It is an identical seat with the same amenities." Bianca's face turned a shade of crimson that matched her blazer. 2A? "I didn't book 2A. I specifically requested the bulkhead window." "The system assigned you 2A, Ma'am," Sarah said firmly. "Please, we need to close the cabin doors for departure. If you could just take your seat." "I will not," Bianca shrieked. The sound carried all the way back to economy comfort. "Do you know who I am? I am Bianca Miller, Vice President of Miller & Sons Real Estate. I know the CEO of this airline. I have his personal email." Jayden suppressed a smirk. The CEO of Sovereign Air was a man named Gregory Hines, who reported directly to the board that Jayden chaired. "Ma'am, please," Jayden said, his voice calm but authoritative. "The lady is doing her job. 2A is right there. It's the same seat." Bianca whipped her head back to Jayden. "Don't you speak to me. You don't get to tell me what to do. You think because you put on a pair of headphones you fit in here? I know your type." The cabin went deadly silent. The phrase, "your type," hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "My type?" Jayden asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Entitled. Lazy. Thinking the world owes you a handout," Bianca spat the words out. "I worked for 30 years to afford this ticket. You probably deal. Whatever it is you deal. To afford those shoes. I bet this ticket was bought with stolen credit card points." Sarah gasped. "Mrs. Miller, that is unacceptable language. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and take your seat, or you will be escorted off this plane." Bianca laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Escorted off? Me? You're going to kick me off for him. He's probably a security threat. Look at him. He's wearing a hood indoors. Has he even been screened properly?" She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this. Everyone needs to see how Sovereign Air treats its premium customers, prioritizing thugs over business professionals." She pointed the camera lens right in Jayden's face. "Say hello to the internet, seat thief. Tell them how you scammed your way into first class." Jaden didn't flinch. He looked directly into the lens. "Mrs. Miller, I'm asking you one last time. Sit down. You are delaying the flight for 300 people." "I'm not delaying anything. You are," Bianca yelled. She turned to Sarah. "Get the captain, now. I want the captain to come out here and check this boy's ID. I bet it's fake. I bet he doesn't even have a passport." Sarah looked at Jaden, a silent plea in her eyes, asking for permission to intervene more forcefully. Jaden gave a microscopic nod. "I will inform Captain Reynolds of the disturbance," Sarah said stiffly. "But I am warning you, Mrs. Miller. The captain has the authority to remove passengers who are disruptive." "Good!" Bianca shouted, slamming her bag onto the empty seat of 2A, but refusing to sit in it. "Go get him. Let's see whose side he takes, the tax-paying businesswoman or the—" She stopped herself, realizing she was being recorded by other passengers now too, but the implication was clear. Sarah retreated to the cockpit. The door clicked shut, locking the flight deck. Jaden looked out the window. He could see the baggage handlers tossing suitcases onto the belt loader below. He wondered if Bianca's bag was down there. He hoped it was durable. "You're going to regret this," Bianca hissed at him, leaning over the armrest. "I have lawyers. I'll sue this airline into the ground, and I'll make sure you're investigated by the FBI, the DEA, everyone." Jaden turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You really should have taken seat 2A, Bianca." "Shut up!" she snapped. 2 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Reynolds emerged. He was a tall man with silver hair and 4 gold stripes on his shoulders. He looked stern. He adjusted his cap and walked into the cabin. Bianca smirked triumphantly. "Finally. Captain, thank God. This stewardess is incompetent, and this passenger refuses to move from my seat. I want him removed for security reasons. He's been threatening me." It was a bold-faced lie, and everyone in the first 3 rows knew it. Captain Reynolds didn't look at Bianca. He walked straight to seat 1A. He stopped in front of Jaden. Bianca crossed her arms, waiting for the ejection. "Go on. Tell him." Captain Reynolds looked down at Jaden. Then he did something that made Bianca's jaw drop. He removed his cap and bowed his head slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," the captain said, his voice respectful and deferential. "My apologies for the delay. Sarah informed me of the situation. How would you like us to proceed?" Bianca froze. Her phone, still recording, wavered in her hand. "Mr. Cole?" Jaden unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, towering over Bianca now. The dynamic in the cabin shifted instantly. He wasn't the kid in the hoodie anymore. He was the man in charge. "Captain Reynolds," Jaden said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the first-class cabin. "I don't feel safe flying with this passenger. She has been verbally abusive. She has made racially charged accusations, and she is disrupting the safety of this flight." "Understood, sir," Captain Reynolds said. He turned to Bianca. His face was stone cold. "Ma'am, grab your bags." "What?" Bianca screeched, her voice cracking. "You're listening to him? Who is he? Who is he?" Jaden stepped forward, entering her personal space just enough to make her shrink back. "I'm the reason this plane flies, Bianca," Jaden said calmly. "I own Sovereign Air." The blood drained from Bianca's face so fast she looked like she might faint. The phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the carpet with a dull thud. That's impossible," she stammered. You're a kid. And you," Jaden said, "are trespassing on my aircraft." He turned to the captain. "Ground the flight, Captain. I want full security protocol. We need to file a police report for harassment and disorderly conduct before we take off. No one goes anywhere until she is off this plane." "Yes, sir," Captain Reynolds said. He picked up the interphone, PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are going to have a slight delay. We have a security issue in the first-class cabin involving a disruptive passenger. We are returning to the gate to meet with airport police. Please remain seated." The engine whine spooled down. The aircraft jolted as the tug began to push them back, not toward the runway but back toward the terminal. Bianca looked around wildly. The other passengers weren't looking at the floor anymore. They were looking at her, and they were holding up their phones. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't do this. I have a meeting." "Not anymore," Jaden said, sitting back down in seat 1A and putting his headphones back on. "Sarah?" "Yes, Mr. Cole." "I think I will have that water now." The connection of the jet bridge to the fuselage felt like a gavel striking a sounding block. The thud reverberated through the cabin, signaling the end of Bianca Miller's tenure on Flight 402, though she refused to accept it. "I am not moving," Bianca screamed, her hands gripping the armrests of seat 2A, the seat she had refused to sit in, but was now clinging to like a life raft. "This is kidnapping! You cannot hold me here against my will! I want my lawyer! I want the press!" "You're going to get the press, lady," a voice from row 3 called out. A young woman in a university sweatshirt was holding her phone high, live-streaming the entire meltdown. "You're trending on Twitter right now." Jaden remained in seat 1A, sipping the water Sarah had brought him. He looked bored, but his mind was racing, calculating the PR fallout for Sovereign Air. He needed to make sure this looked like a zero-tolerance policy for abuse, not just a billionaire throwing his weight around. 3 Port Authority police officers boarded the plane. They were large men, wearing tactical vests and serious expressions. The lead officer, a man with a buzz cut and a name tag reading Officer Davis, scanned the first-class cabin. "Who is the disruptive passenger?" Davis asked, his voice booming. "That would be me," Bianca shouted, standing up suddenly. "I am the victim here. That boy," she pointed a shaking finger at Jaden, "threatened my life. He claimed to own the airline. He is clearly delusional and dangerous. I want him arrested immediately." Officer Davis looked at Jaden. Jaden didn't stand up. He didn't shout. He simply unlocked his tablet and slid it across the tray table toward the officer. "Officer Davis," Jaden said calmly. "My name is Jaden Cole. I am the chairman of Sovereign Air. If you check with the flight deck, Captain Reynolds has already filed a complaint against Ms. Miller for interference with a flight crew, verbal assault, and failure to comply with federal safety regulations. The tablet contains the digital corporate registry confirming my identity." Davis looked at the tablet, then up at Sarah. "Is this accurate?" Davis asked the flight attendant. "Yes, officer," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Mr. Cole is the owner. Ms. Miller has been abusive since she stepped on board. She used racial slurs, refused to sit in her assigned seat, and delayed the flight. We have multiple witnesses." "Lies!" Bianca shrieked. "They're all in on it. It's a conspiracy." She turned to the businessman in 2B, the man who had been hiding behind his newspaper earlier. You saw it. Tell them he attacked me." The businessman, Mr. Henderson, finally lowered his paper. He looked at Bianca with pure disdain. "Lady, the only thing he did was ask you to sit down. You're the one who threatened to have him investigated by the FBI because you didn't like his hoodie. It was disgusting." Bianca gasped, betraying a look of genuine shock that someone of her status wouldn't side with her. Officer Davis stepped forward, pulling a pair of zip ties from his belt. "Bianca Miller, you are under arrest for interference with flight operations and disorderly conduct. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No." Bianca backed away, stumbling into the galley wall. "You can't arrest me. I'm a vice president. I have a mortgage. I have a life. You have the right to remain silent, Davis recited, grabbing her wrist with practiced efficiency. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Bianca thrashed, kicking out at the officer's shins. Get off me! This is police brutality! Help! Someone help! The struggle was brief and pathetic. Within seconds, Bianca was cuffed. The illusion of her power had shattered completely. Let's go, Davis said, shoving her gently but firmly toward the door. This was the walk of shame. As they dragged her down the aisle of the first-class cabin, Bianca looked at Jaden one last time. Her face was a mask of ruined mascara and red blotches. You ruined my life, she hissed at him. Jaden looked up, his expression cold. You did this to yourself, Bianca. I just bought the ticket. As the officers escorted her off the plane, a spontaneous round of applause erupted from the economy cabin behind the curtain. The passengers in the back had heard everything. The cheering grew louder as she was hauled through the jet bridge, a chorus of judgment that followed her all the way to the terminal. Jaden sighed and rubbed his temples. Mr. Cole, Captain Reynolds stepped out of the cockpit again. We can refuel and be back in the queue for takeoff in 45 minutes. Unless you need to deplane? Jaden shook his head. No. I have a meeting in London I can't miss. Let the legal team handle her on the ground. Just get us in the air, Captain, and comp everyone a round of drinks in economy. They waited long enough. Yes, sir. But while Jaden flew into the clouds, escaping the immediate noise, Bianca Miller was descending into a hell of her own making. The holding cell at JFK Airport was a stark contrast to the first-class lounge Bianca was used to. It was a small, windowless room, with cinder-block walls painted a depressing shade of beige, a metal bench bolted to the floor, and a lingering smell of industrial cleaner and sweat. Bianca sat on the edge of the bench, her expensive red blazer wrinkled, her leopard print scarf trailing on the dirty floor. Her hands were no longer cuffed, but she felt trapped. She had been processed, fingerprinted, mugshot taken. The humiliation was visceral. But she was still clinging to a shred of hope. She was Bianca Miller. She had connections. This was all a misunderstanding that a few phone calls would fix. When the officer finally allowed her one phone call, she didn't call a lawyer. She called her boss, Robert Sterling. No relation to the banned name list, let's rename him to Robert Halloway, the CEO of Miller & Sons Real Estate. Robert was a man who hated bad publicity, but he valued aggression. Bianca thought he would appreciate her fighting spirit. "Robert!" she cried into the receiver when he picked up. "Thank God. You won't believe what happened. I've been arrested. False charges. Some thug on a plane claimed he owned the airline, and the police actually believed him. I need you to send the company lawyer down to JFK. We are going to sue Sovereign Air for millions." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Robert, are you there?" "Bianca." Robert's voice was icy. "Have you checked the internet in the last hour?" "No, they took my phone." "Why?" "You're everywhere, Bianca. Everywhere." Robert's voice shook with suppressed rage. "There is a video with 4 million views on TikTok. It's titled, 'Karen Tries to Kick Owner Off His Own Plane.' It shows you screaming at a 19-year-old boy, calling him trash and mocking his clothes. It shows you using racial slurs." I was provoked," Bianca stammered, her stomach dropping. "He was in my seat." "It doesn't matter," Robert shouted, causing Bianca to pull the phone away from her ear. "Do you know who that thug is?" "That is Jaden Cole. He inherited the coal fortune last year. We are currently trying to bid on a commercial contract for one of his logistics warehouses in New Jersey, a contract worth $50 million. Bianca felt the blood drain from her extremities. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Well, know this. I just got an email from Cole Stratton Logistics. They have pulled our bid. They cited ethical incompatibility. You just cost this firm $50 million in 10 minutes. Robert, please, I can fix this." "You're fired, Bianca," Robert said, his voice final. "Don't come to the office. We will courier your personal effects to your house, and don't expect a severance package. You were terminated for cause gross misconduct." The line went dead. Bianca stared at the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like an angry insect. Fired. She was fired. Before she could process the shock, the heavy metal door of the interrogation room opened. A man in a sharp, navy blue suit walked in. He carried a leather briefcase and had the shark-like demeanor of a high-end corporate attorney. He wasn't her lawyer. He sat down across from her, placing a single file folder on the metal table. "Ms. Miller," the man said smoothly, "my name is Arthur Prescott. I represent Mr. Jaden Cole and Sovereign Air." Bianca straightened up, trying to regain some composure. "Good. I want to talk settlement. Your client humiliated me. I'm willing to drop my lawsuit if you drop these charges and—" Prescott chuckled softly. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Ms. Miller, you seem to be under a severe misapprehension of your position. We are not here to settle. We are here to inform you of the civil litigation being filed against you this morning." He opened the folder and slid a document toward her. "Sovereign Air is suing you for the cost of the fuel used to return to the gate, the landing fees, the ground crew overtime, and the refund costs for the 300 passengers you delayed. The total comes to approximately $140,000. Bianca's eyes bulged. I don't have that kind of money." "Additionally," Prescott continued, ignoring her plea, "Mr. Cole is personally suing you for defamation of character. You accused him of theft and being a security threat in front of a cabin full of witnesses while being recorded. Given his standing as a public business figure, the damages to his reputation are significant." "He's a teenager," Bianca cried out. "He doesn't have a reputation." "He is a billionaire industrialist," Prescott corrected her sharply. "And you are now a viral pariah. By the way, the Federal Aviation Administration has also been notified. You are being placed on the permanent no-fly list for all major carriers. You will never set foot on an airplane in the United States again." Bianca slumped against the cold wall. Her world was collapsing. No job, no travel, hundreds of thousands in debt, public humiliation. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "It was just a seat." Prescott stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at her with zero sympathy. "It wasn't just a seat, Ms. Miller. It was the assumption that you deserved it more than he did. It was the arrogance of thinking your comfort was worth more than his dignity. Mr. Cole asked me to give you a message." Bianca looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "What?" "He said that he hopes you enjoy the bus." Prescott knocked on the door, and the guard let him out, leaving Bianca alone in the silence of the cell. But the story wasn't over. While Bianca sat in jail, the internet was just getting started. The video had migrated from TikTok to the evening news. Commentators were dissecting her body language, her words, her entitlement. And somewhere in the digital noise, people started digging into Bianca's past. If she treated a billionaire like this, how had she treated the people who couldn't fight back? By the time Bianca was released on bail later that night, posted by her distraught husband, who refused to speak to her on the ride home, a new hashtag was trending. It wasn't just about the plane anymore. Former employees, waiters, and neighbors were coming forward. The avalanche had begun, and Jaden Cole was 30,000 feet in the air, sleeping peacefully in seat 1A, unaware that he had just inadvertently launched a movement. The silence in the Miller household was louder than the screaming on the tarmac had been. Bianca sat at her kitchen island, staring at a bowl of fruit that had begun to rot. It had been 3 days since her release from jail, and in those 72 hours, the world she knew had evaporated. Her husband, Gary, had moved into the guest bedroom. He barely spoke to her, communicating mostly through heavy sighs and the slamming of doors. Gary was a mild-mannered architect who had spent 20 years apologizing for Bianca's behavior at dinner parties, dismissing it as passion or high standards. But he couldn't apologize for this. Not when his own partners were asking him to take a sabbatical because the name Miller had become toxic. Bianca's phone buzzed. It was a notification from a local news outlet. She knew she shouldn't look, but her thumb moved of its own accord. More victims come forward. The Plain Lady's history of harassment. Bianca's breath hitched. She clicked the link. The article wasn't about Jaden Cole. It was about a woman named Maya Evans. Maya was a young nurse who had rented a basement apartment from the Millers 5 years ago. Bianca had evicted her after 3 months, claiming Maya cooked smelly food and had suspicious guests. In the article, Maya had provided screenshots of text messages from Bianca. "I don't want your kind of people hanging around the driveway," one text read. "If I smell that spice again, I'm keeping your deposit," read another. Bianca threw the phone onto the counter. "Lies!" she shouted to the empty room. "She was a terrible tenant. She ruined the carpet." But the internet didn't care about the carpet. The internet saw a pattern. Desperate to control the narrative, Bianca had made a fatal error earlier that morning. She had agreed to a telephone interview with a conservative talk radio host who promised to let her tell her side of the story. She thought she would find a sympathetic ear. She thought she could explain that she was stressed, that her sciatica was flaring up, that she was the victim of a woke airline policy. Instead, she had dug her own grave. When the host asked, "Mrs. Miller, do you regret what you said to Mr. Cole?" Bianca had replied, "I regret that he didn't identify himself properly. If he had just dressed like a businessman, none of this would have happened. It's really his fault for being misleading." The clip was already circulating. It was being dissected by body language experts, PR crisis managers, and millions of teenagers on TikTok. They weren't just laughing at her anymore. They were mobilizing. The doorbell rang. Bianca smoothed her hair. Maybe it was Gary coming back from work early. Maybe he was ready to forgive her. She opened the door to find 2 people standing on her porch. One was a process server, holding a thick envelope. The other was a reporter with a camera crew standing on the sidewalk. "Bianca Miller?" the process server asked. "Get off my property." Bianca slammed the door, but not before the camera caught her disheveled appearance. Sweatpants, stained t-shirt, no makeup. It was a far cry from the high-powered executive in the red blazer. She slid down the door, clutching the envelope the server had managed to slide through the mail slot. She tore it open. It wasn't just the lawsuit from Sovereign Air. It was a notification from the city council. They were opening an investigation into Miller & Sons real estate for violations of the Fair Housing Act based on the newly surfaced evidence from former tenants like Maya. Bianca scrambled up and ran to the window. The news van was still there. She grabbed her phone and dialed the one person she thought might still have her back. Her sister, Joyce. "Joyce, you have to help me. Can I come stay with you in Florida for a while, just until this blows over?" "Bianca," Joyce's voice was tight. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not? I'm your sister." "Because my husband is black, Bianca. Or did you forget that? We saw the video. We heard what you called that boy, and we saw the texts to that poor nurse. I didn't mean it like that. Everyone is so sensitive. No, Bianca, you meant it. You've always meant it. We just tolerated it because we're family. But we're done. Don't call here again." The line clicked dead. Bianca stood in the center of her living room, the late afternoon sun casting long, accusatory shadows across the floor. She was isolated, completely and utterly. But the true blow, the one that would shatter her denial into dust, was yet to come. The front door opened. It was Gary. He wasn't alone. He was with a man Bianca recognized, a divorce attorney named Lucas Thorne. Wait, Thorne is on the banned list. Let's correct this immediately. Let's name him Lucas Reed. "Gary," Bianca whispered. Gary didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I can't do this, Bianca," Gary said softly. "I can't lose the firm. I can't lose my friends. I can't be the husband of the most hated woman in America." "You're leaving me now?" Bianca's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "When I need you the most." "I'm protecting what's left of our assets," Gary said, finally meeting her eyes. They were cold, devoid of the love that had been there for 30 years. "Lucas has the papers. I've moved my half of the savings into a separate trust. I'm filing for immediate dissolution of the marriage." "You coward!" Bianca screamed, lunging for him. Lucas Reed stepped in between them, his hand raised. "Mrs. Miller, I advise you to calm down. Any physical aggression will only hurt your case in the upcoming proceedings." Bianca froze. She looked around her beautiful living room, the expensive art on the walls, the imported rugs. It was all slipping away like sand through her fingers. "Jaden Cole," she whispered, the name tasting like bile. "He did this." "No, Bianca," Gary said, walking toward the door with a suitcase he had packed earlier. "You did this. Jaden Cole just turned on the lights." 3 months later, the Civil Court of New York was packed. It wasn't a criminal trial, but the atmosphere was just as charged. The lawsuit, Sovereign Heir and Jaden Cole versus Bianca Miller, had become the marquee legal event of the year. Jaden sat at the plaintiff's table. He looked different than he had on the plane. He wore a bespoke navy suit, his hair freshly cut. He looked every inch the Billionaire chairman. Beside him sat Arthur Prescott, his lawyer, looking like a shark who smelled blood in the water. On the other side, Bianca sat alone with a court-appointed attorney. She had burned through her savings paying for a high-end defense team that quit after she refused to follow their advice to settle and apologize. Now, she was left with a weary public defender named Mr. Gorski, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Bianca looked haggard. She had lost weight. Her hair was dull. The fire that had fueled her entitlement was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal look. Judge Kowalski, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, banged the gavel. "We are here to hear final arguments and determine damages," the judge said. "Mr. Prescott, you may proceed." Prescott stood up. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply projected a PowerPoint slide onto the screen behind him. It was a timeline. "Your Honor," Prescott began, "this case is not about a seat. It is about a systematic disruption of commerce and a malicious attack on a private citizen. We have established that Ms. Miller's actions cost Sovereign Heir $142,000 in direct operational costs. We have receipts for the fuel, the landing fees, and the overtime." He clicked a button. A video played. It was the footage from the plane. Even after 3 months, the audio of Bianca's screeching voice made the courtroom cringe. "But," Prescott continued, "the defense argues that Ms. Miller was under emotional duress and didn't know who she was speaking to. They argued that if she had known Mr. Cole was the owner, she would have acted differently. Prescott turned to Bianca. "Ms. Miller, is that true? If you knew he was a billionaire, you would have been polite?" Bianca stood up, ignoring Mr. Gorski's tug on her sleeve. "Yes, of course. I respect success. I thought he was just some hoodlum stealing a seat." A gasp went through the gallery. She had just admitted it. She admitted that her respect was conditional on wealth, and her abuse was reserved for those she deemed beneath her. Prescott smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Thank you for that admission, Ms. Miller. However, we have subpoenaed your flight history with Sovereign Air for the last 10 years. He clicked the remote again. A spreadsheet appeared. May 2021. Verbal abuse of a gate agent in Atlanta. Reason, she looked at me wrong. Result, warning issued. December 2023. Threw a hot coffee at a flight attendant because it wasn't a specific blend. Result, 5,000 airline miles deducted. January 2024. Demanded a passenger in 3B be moved because he smelled like curry. Result, complaint filed, no action taken. Prescott turned to the jury. This is not an isolated incident. This is a lifestyle. Ms. Miller believes she owns the space she occupies, and anyone else is an intruder. But on January 10th, she met someone she couldn't bully. And now, she wants the court to believe she is the victim. Prescott sat down. The silence was heavy. Mr. Gorski stood up weakly. "Your Honor, my client is... She is going through a difficult divorce. She has lost her job. She has been publicly shamed. We ask for leniency regarding the punitive damages. She simply cannot pay millions. She is destitute." It was a Hail Mary, a plea for pity. Then Jaden Cole stood up. Technically, he wasn't supposed to speak during closing arguments, but he raised his hand, and Judge Kowalski, intrigued, nodded. "Your Honor," Jaden said. His voice was calm, the same voice that had grounded a flight. "I don't want her money." Bianca's head snapped up. Hope flared in her eyes. "I don't need her money," Jaden corrected. "Sovereign Air makes more in an hour than Ms. Miller made in her lifetime. But this isn't about the money. It's about the cost." He walked over to the witness stand, looking directly at Bianca. "You said I stole your seat. You said I didn't belong. You judged me based on a hoodie and the color of my skin. You tried to weaponize the police against me. If I had been anyone else, if I had been the student in 3B or the nurse you evicted, I would be in jail right now. You would have won. You would have crushed me and gone on to your meeting in London without a second thought." Jaden paused. "I am asking the court for the full amount of damages. Not to pay me, but to fund a new scholarship program, the Bianca Miller Equity in Aviation Scholarship. Every penny you pay will go toward training pilots and crew members from underrepresented communities, people who look like me, people you think don't belong." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. It was the ultimate karma. Her name would be forever attached to the very people she despised. Bianca's face went white. "You can't do that. That's my name." "It's my money now," Jaden said quietly. Judge Kowalski slammed the gavel. "Order! Order in the court." She looked at the papers in front of her, then at Bianca. "Ms. Miller, the evidence is overwhelming. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. You are ordered to pay $142,000 in restitution to Sovereign Air. Furthermore, for the defamation and emotional distress caused to Mr. Cole, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $5 million. $5 million? Bianca shrieked. "I don't have $5 million. "Then the court will seize your assets," Judge Kowalski said without blinking. "Your home, your vehicles, and your investments will be liquidated to satisfy the judgment. Court is adjourned." The gavel bang sounded like a gunshot. Bianca collapsed into a chair. It was over. The house was gone. The car was gone. Her reputation was gone. As the courtroom cleared, Jayden walked past her table. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just adjusted his cuffs. "Mr. Cole," Bianca cried out, grabbing the edge of the table. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't take everything." Jayden stopped. He looked back at her over his shoulder. "You had a choice, Bianca. You could have just sat in 2A. He walked out the double doors, flanked by his legal team, leaving Bianca alone in the empty courtroom with nothing but the echo of her own choices. But the story had one final twist waiting, because while Bianca had lost her fortune, she was about to learn that Rock Bottom had a basement, and that basement was located in a federal indictment that had just been unsealed in a different district. The seizure of Bianca Miller's assets was a spectacle. Local news vans camped out on the curb of her sprawling suburban estate as movers hauled out her furniture, her art collection, and the contents of her walk-in closet. The for sale sign planted on the lawn by the bank felt like a tombstone, marking the death of her social standing. Bianca, now living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town that smelled of damp drywall, watched the footage on a small, cracked television. She had nothing left. Gary had finalized the divorce and moved to a condo in Scottsdale with a younger woman. Her friends had blocked her number. She thought the nightmare was over. She thought she had paid the price. She was wrong. The viral fame and the civil trial had done more than just humiliate her. They had drawn the attention of the IRS and the FBI. When Arthur Prescott had subpoenaed her financial records for the defamation suit, he had stumbled upon discrepancies in the books of Miller & Sons Real Estate, discrepancies that Bianca, in her role as Vice President of Finance, had personally orchestrated. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 months after the civil verdict, a knock came at her apartment door. It wasn't a process server this time. It was the FBI. Bianca Miller, Special Agent Reynolds, no relation to the captain, held up a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Bianca dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the cheap linoleum. "Arrest? For what? The trial is over. I lost everything." "This isn't about the plane, ma'am," the agent said, stepping inside. "This is about a 5-year scheme of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. We found the offshore accounts you were hiding from your husband and the IRS. We know about the maintenance fees you charged tenants that went straight into your pocket." Bianca was frozen. The plane incident had been the catalyst, the loose thread that, when pulled, unraveled her entire criminal tapestry. If she hadn't made a scene on Flight 402, no one would have looked at her finances. She would have retired rich and undetected. Her own arrogance had been the whistleblower. The trial that followed was swift and brutal. Unlike the civil case, there were no cameras in the federal courtroom. There was no Jayden Cole to offer a moral lesson. There was just a federal prosecutor named Thomas Grady, who laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Bianca was sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility. 2 years later, the common room of the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution was loud. Inmates were playing cards, arguing, or staring blankly at the wall. Bianca sat in the corner, grey-haired and gaunt. She was scrubbing the floor, a job that paid 12 cents an hour. "Hey, Miller, turn up the TV," an inmate shouted. Bianca sighed and walked over to the television mounted on the wall. A news program was on. The banner at the bottom read, "Sovereign Air, CEO Jayden Cole announces record profits and new aviation academy." Bianca froze. On the screen, Jaden Cole looked older, sharper. He was standing on a tarmac in front of a brand new Boeing 787. But it wasn't the plane that caught Bianca's eye. It was the group of young people standing behind him. They were diverse: black, Hispanic, Asian, white, all wearing crisp pilot uniforms. Today, Jaden was saying into the microphone, we are proud to graduate the first class of the Bianca Miller Equity in Aviation Scholarship. These 50 young men and women came from backgrounds where flight school was just a dream. Now, thanks to the funding provided by legal settlements, they are the future of aviation. The crowd on TV cheered. Jaden smiled, a genuine, warm smile. We believe that the sky belongs to everyone, Jaden continued, not just those who think they own the seat. The camera panned to the side of the new training facility. There, in bold iron letters over the entrance, was the name, the Bianca Miller Center for Diversity and Inclusion. The inmates in the common room burst out laughing. "Yo, Miller, that's you!" One woman cackled. "You're famous. You're a diversity hero." Bianca stared at the screen, her hands gripping the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. It was the ultimate punishment. Her name, which she had protected with such ferocity, which she had used as a shield of elitism, had been repurposed. She was now the face of the very thing she hated. She would rot in a cell for 8 years, scrubbing floors, while her legacy was used to lift up the people she had tried to keep down. On the screen, Jaden Cole finished his speech and walked toward the jet. He didn't look back. He had ascended. Bianca turned away from the TV, tears streaming down her face, and dipped her mop back into the dirty grey water. "Hey, Miller!" the guard yelled. "You missed a spot. Row 1A. Get to it." Bianca flinched at the seat number. She walked to the spot, got on her knees, and began to scrub. And that is how Bianca Miller learned the hardest lesson of all. When you try to fly above everyone else without earning your wings, the fall doesn't just hurt, it destroys you. She wanted to keep Jaden Cole in his place, but she ended up losing hers entirely. From a first-class seat to a prison cell, her arrogance wrote a check that reality cashed with interest. Jaden didn't just win, he turned her hatred into opportunity for others, proving that the best revenge isn't anger, it's success. What would you have done if you were Jaden? Would you have taken the money or created the scholarship? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.